The strange but true stories featured on this podcast contain details some people may find unsettling. Listener discretion is advised. I'm Chyaz Samuel, and things are about to get weird. Hello, and an early Merry Christmas to all who celebrate. I hope you're all having a lovely festive season, whatever you like to get up to at this time of year. For me, it mostly involves an inordinate amount of cheese and mulled wine. And mead, actually. I'm a big fan of mead, even though it's trickier to find. But for now, as I'm recording, I just have a nice cup of tea. Anyway, after the Weird Fix episode that I put out last week, where I talked about the history of telling ghost stories at Christmas and how much I wished this tradition would come back, I thought today would be the perfect opportunity to practice what I was preaching. So welcome to episode 49, where I'll be telling you a selection of Christmas ghost stories. In my head, we're all gathered around a roaring fireplace in comfy armchairs with hot drinks and old paintings on the walls. And I'm reading from a big, old, leather-bound book, which sounds much more festive and spooky than the reality, which is that I'm working off a laptop in the 4 white walls of my spare room. But that's what we have imaginations for. So join me as we get all Victorian and explore just some of the Christmas-themed, strange but allegedly true paranormal tales I've stumbled across this December. Firstly, allow me to introduce you to 2 of the spirits which are thought to inhabit one of England's most haunted houses. Although, if the stories are to be believed, you might not want to become too closely acquainted with them. Roos Hall, a red brick Tudor mansion located in the county of Suffolk, has long been considered to be home to several otherworldly lodgers. And when you consider that its construction was completed around 1593 and think about how many people must have passed through the property over the centuries, it's not so much of a surprise. If you're a believer, of course. Not to mention the fact that still standing in the grounds is an old oak tree, which was used as a site for executions of convicted criminals, so there's a decent amount of dark history associated with the place from that alone. But our story today concerns 2 ghosts which have been spotted near the house on several cold Christmas Eve nights. Witnesses all report the same thing. They say that they have seen a horse-drawn carriage hurtling silently down the driveway in the direction of the house. But as it gets closer, they realise that neither the horses nor the driver of the carriage are earthly creatures, and are very much of the spirit world. But that's not all. They're also missing their heads. The Headless Horseman is a well-known folklore figure, and many people believe that the one reported at Roos Hall has become part of the fabric of this. However, in the case of this Christmas Eve visitation, some reports have suggested that the horseman does not show up alone. When the carriage finally reaches the house, it's said that a beautiful woman emerges from it. But be warned, because although she will try to draw you in and capture your gaze, staring directly into her eyes is said to have caused madness or even death in those who weren't able to resist. I haven't been able to find any suggestions about who these mysterious ghosts could be, or had been, should I say, or indeed why they only show themselves on Christmas Eve. But just to make things stranger, they're not the only spirits believed to be haunting Roos Hall who have a particular connection to the festive period. 2 labourers employed by the house's owner back in the early 1900s, Benjamin Benz and Robert Elvin, reported that on numerous occasions they'd spotted the ghost of a woman on and around the grounds of the hall. The first time Robert spotted her was just before Christmas in 1908, and this was similar for Benjamin too, and he spoke of how neither man wished to ever see her again, although by this point they had experienced multiple sightings. My first thought was whether this could be the same woman described in the horseman apparition. That uneasy feeling they'd had around the spirit would line up with the more sinister beliefs around the beautiful woman from the carriage, but it's really impossible to know for sure. As I mentioned at the start, Roos Hall has a reputation for being a real hotspot for paranormal activity, with the visitors claiming they've seen everything from the ghost of a young girl staring out of an upstairs window to a woman walking 6 laps around the old oak tree, trying to summon the devil. Whether she's someone whose life was ended at the spot through execution, we don't know. But this story feels dark enough to be connected to the estate's grisly past. Perhaps she's even the same woman from the Headless Horseman story. Could that carriage have initially brought her to the hall, where her spirit remains trapped, walking in circles around the oak tree? It's certainly very mysterious. With just a few days to go before Christmas at the time I'm posting this episode, who's to say whether any of the Roos Hall spirits will be making an appearance on the night of the 24th of December this year? I'll certainly be keeping an eye out for any reports coming out of Suffolk to find out. Okay, we're going to head across the pond for our next story, which is rooted far more in the modern day than both our last one and our next one. For the most part, anyway. Whilst putting this episode together, I came across a news story from the US state of Mississippi, describing some particularly spooky events which took place during December of 2020. Just in case that entire year wasn't awful enough, this time 3 years ago, one family in the city of Brandon were about to encounter the most chilling Christmas gift imaginable. Get ready, because this is seriously weird. Just before the 25th of December, a couple named Whitney and Michael Merritt had received a present from Whitney's mother, which was intended for their young daughter. It had been acquired from a friend of a friend and was something rather more unique than the latest toy or gadget from an Amazon wishlist. The item in question was a vintage doll carriage. It had 4 black wheels with cream spokes which matched the colour of the ornate swirled design of the body of the pram. When you see a photo of it, it definitely looks like an antique. It's eye-catching and beautiful, but it does have a slightly creepy feel to it. Whitney said that after her daughter received the gift, it sat by the family's Christmas tree for a few days, and other than its physical presence in their home, it didn't seem to have any other impact on their environment. But all that was about to change. As New Year's Eve came and went and 2021 was getting underway, the Merritts started to experience some odd happenings in their home, which they had moved into quite recently. It all began with banging noises, firstly coming from the walls and then from the attic. Whitney told her local news station, WLBT, that the bangs were so loud that she would think that someone was at the door and would go to check before realizing no one was there. She tried to explain the sounds away in her mind, telling herself that the house could have just been settling, or that the noises were normal and they just weren't used to the house yet. But they continued to grow louder and more menacing. Eventually, she sent her husband into the attic to investigate, and he was so concerned at this point he even armed himself for protection in case there was an intruder up there. But once again, nothing was discovered. Then things got progressively more sinister. About a week into January, Whitney was in a deep sleep one night when she heard an almighty crash. Startled, of course, she went to investigate, but again found nothing. There seemed to be no source of the noise. The next morning, however, she was greeted with a weird sight as she entered her kitchen. There was a bag in the middle of the floor, around 4 feet away from her table, containing 2 brand new mugs that she had just purchased. Both were completely broken, but there were no clues at all as to how they got there. They couldn't have rolled off the table in the middle of the night as they'd been left standing upright, and no one else in the family knew anything about it. Whitney was growing more and more perplexed, and the events of the very next night did nothing to alleviate her confusion. In fact, it was all about to get much stranger. Around 3:30 a.m., Whitney heard another huge crash and flew into her kitchen to try and work out what was happening. Once more, there was a bag on the floor with another broken mug in it, which must have been made out of glass as several shards were scattered around it. She set about tidying it up, and just as she was about to get back into bed, no doubt exhausted given the hour, there was another disturbance. This time, she described it as, quote, someone dropping a load of silverware into the sink. I feel like that sound is so specific, and I absolutely understand what she means. I think I would recognize that very particular sound of something clanging in my kitchen sink too. It does make a distinguishable noise. But when she went to check, nothing was out of place, and more importantly, there was nothing in the sink. In the following days, more and more unexplainable incidents started to take place around the family's home. Items in their daughter's bedroom would randomly fall to the floor when no one was there. Doors would slam shut. Toys would start playing music when they were switched off. But the creepiest events were still to come. Whitney's husband, Michael, worked night shifts, hence why it was only her experiencing these incidents in the early hours of the morning. One evening, she was cleaning in their living room whilst Michael got ready for work, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw him walk into the kitchen to make himself coffee. She started to talk to him but got no response, and when she went into the next room to find him and ask why he was ignoring her, there was no one there. Whitney went in search of her husband and was baffled to find that he was still in their bedroom, asleep. Speaking about the event, she said, quote, I saw him. I swear on my kids, and I'm not crazy. Please don't think I'm crazy, because repeating this to somebody, I know it sounds weird, because I've never believed in any of that ever in my life. I'm not, but I saw a person walk past the door into the kitchen. Bizarre. And the following day would prove to be no less wild. Whitney had gone out food shopping with her daughter, and her two other children were also out of the house. One was at their grandparents' and the other was at school. Michael was at home and was the only member of their family there at the time. Around lunchtime, Whitney received a phone call from her husband, asking whether there was any way that their son had returned home early. She was confused and confirmed to Michael that their son was still at school. It was only when Whitney got back from the supermarket that Michael explained the reason for asking her this odd question. As he lay in bed that morning, he had heard their front door close, followed by their son's bedroom door closing. Shortly afterwards, the banging that had become so familiar to the family had started up once again, and as before, it sounded like it was coming from the walls. Determined to try and get to the bottom of the noises that were tormenting them, Michael jumped out of bed and went to his son's bedroom. There, he didn't find the boy, who was genuinely at school, but he did discover that the bedroom light and Xbox were both on, and there was a bottle of water knocked over and dripping onto the floor that had very clearly only just fallen. Whitney arrived home not long after this strange phone call with Michael, and they started to have a serious conversation about all of the weird things happening in their house. As they were talking, Michael suddenly became preoccupied by the presence of the one-of-a-kind gift his daughter had been given for Christmas just a few weeks earlier. Something must have come over him which made him draw a connection between the vintage doll carriage being in their home and all of the unexplained things that had taken place. Instinct told him that the pram had to go, and without a second thought, he picked it up and put it outside. Later that night, as the family lay asleep, do you know what happened? Nothing. That's right, from the moment the antique present was removed from the house, the paranormal activity ceased completely. But that's not the end of this story. When Whitney opened up about all of the bizarre goings-on the family believed were linked to the doll carriage to her mum, who had of course given it to them in the first place, she was told that the previous owners had suffered a recent tragedy in their own family. The husband of the pram's former keeper had passed away in a motorbike accident just a year prior, and Whitney is now convinced that it was his spirit she saw walk into her kitchen. Michael is entirely on board with this theory too, and gave this quote to WLBT. He said, "We both strongly believe that there is a spirit attached to that doll buggy. With what was going on, there's no other explanation. It all started with all the knocking and banging on the walls out of nowhere, and I knew." Although the couple do understand that others may be skeptical, they are sure that the item was haunted. As for what happened to the pram, well, they decided to put it up for sale on good old Facebook Marketplace with a price tag of $65. I have no idea whether it's sold or not. Maybe in the future we'll be reading another news story from somewhere else in the US, talking about the strange incidents that happened in another family's home once the pram came into their lives. But you wouldn't be able to say they weren't warned, because what did the caption of the Facebook Marketplace listing read? Full disclosure, it's definitely haunted. Next, I couldn't possibly put this episode together without including the chilling case of the Mistletoe Bride. Now, this is one of those ghost stories that seems to have gained legend status over the years. There are several different versions of this tale, and the setting seems to vary depending on who tells it. Whisperings about these events look to have been around for hundreds of years, but many people believe that the original story is most likely the one that concerns Lord Lavelle and his new wife, whose wedding celebrations took place at Bramshill House in the English county of Hampshire one snowy Christmas day. It's thought that Lord Lavelle's bride was a relative of the house's owner, banker and politician Sir John Cope, who bought Bramshill in 1699, and whilst her name isn't always cited, some believe it to have been Anne. Now, given the time of year, Bramshill House was full of Christmas touches, most notably mistletoe, which was hung throughout the vast property. As the story goes, whilst the guests were all gathered at the house merrily toasting the newlyweds, the bride and some of the groomsmen decided to play a game. A bizarre version of hide and seek, where the idea was that the bride would hide somewhere in the huge house, and the men in the wedding party would try to find her. The first one who did would get to kiss her, which is odd, but perhaps it wasn't all that unusual of a wedding activity back in those days. It's probably more likely connected to the abundance of mistletoe, right? I feel like that's a whole separate rabbit hole I could fall down. Anyway, the bride seems to have agreed to take part in this game, and she set off to find a hiding spot. After the appropriate amount of time had passed, the groomsmen started to look for her, all hoping to be the one to win her kiss after discovering where she was hidden. The men searched the house from top to bottom, but after a while their excitement started to turn to confusion. Lord Lavelle's new wife was truly nowhere to be found. Before long, the atmosphere at the wedding reception had turned very somber indeed. No matter where the groomsmen and other guests continued to look, they could not uncover the bride's hiding place. The hours turned to days, the days turned to months, and the months eventually turned to years. Anne, if we take that to have been her name, was never seen again, at least not alive. Legend has it that around 50 years after his wedding night, which ended in utter bewilderment and heartbreak, Lord Lavelle was back at Bramshill, presumably visiting the family of his long-missing wife. He decided to take one last thorough look around the property, and during this exploration he ventured up towards the top of the house, eventually finding an attic space. It was here that he noticed an object that bothered him, a large sealed wooden chest that he felt compelled to try and open, and nothing could have prepared him for what he would find. Inside the chest, still wearing her wedding dress, was the skeleton of Lavelle's missing bride. Some say that the heavy chest was actually locked, which is why she couldn't fight her way out, and couldn't be heard shouting through the thick wood. Others say that she was discovered still clutching a sprig of mistletoe. Ugh, just the thought of it gives me the shivers. Now, if you're a believer in the paranormal, you might be unsurprised to hear that since this terrible incident, there have been various reports at Bramshill of a so-called White Lady ghost roaming the hallways late at night. White Lady spirits are often associated with accidental death and tragic endings to love stories, both of which would of course fit with this tale. As I say, the details of this story tend to vary wildly, but the link with Bramshill crops up time and time again. Regardless, the image of the bride's ghost gliding through the house, searching for those who were meant to be looking for her in the only form she was ever able to come out of hiding, is truly chilling. For our final story in this Christmas ghost-themed episode, I wanted to revisit a place previously featured on the podcast, one of the world's most infamous former prisons, Alcatraz. Back in episode 22, I told you all about the mysterious escape, or attempted escape, depending on what you believe, of 3 men incarcerated on the Rock, as it's known. This is just one of the many odd tales to emerge from the Alcatraz history books. There have been countless weird happenings there over the years, including incidents of a paranormal nature, and one of the most well-known is that of the Christmas Eve ghost, who was observed by the prison's warden as well as numerous others working at the Rock during their annual Christmas party. Here's what we know about this otherworldly gatecrasher. One festive season during the 1940s, the staff at Alcatraz were enjoying a small Christmas Eve celebration, along with their warden, James A. Johnston. Johnston was well known for trying to make the working conditions at the prison better for his employees, and would occasionally hold social events at the facility for them. With it being the night before Christmas, I can only imagine that everyone in attendance was in a relatively jolly mood, despite quite literally being at Alcatraz. But their merry party was about to be interrupted by an unexpected visitor. According to modern retellings of the story, whilst the celebrations were in full swing, the fire burned out suddenly and an eerie chill fell over the room. Then, from nowhere, a man dressed in grey Victorian clothing with a mutton chop beard and a black cap entered, and it was clear to all in attendance that he was from another time entirely. He swept through the space before vanishing into thin air as quickly as he arrived. The way he dissipated has been likened to the way that the morning fog in San Francisco lifts, which is fitting considering Alcatraz Island's proximity to the city. The incident made believers out of several of those who witnessed it, including James Johnston, which links back to something I always say. When you have a paranormal or supernatural experience of your own, it really does change the way you view things, even if you've previously been skeptical. But what was especially weird about this incident, other than the obvious, is that the spirit hadn't been wearing an Alcatraz prison uniform, nor a prison guard's clothing. So who on earth could he have been? Well, one of the most compelling theories I've seen put forward was in an article on the website US Ghost Adventures. They cited a newspaper clipping from all the way back in 1857, which described the disappearance of Michael Mann, who had been sailing from Alcatraz Island to North Beach in San Francisco. He had been in a boat with 2 others, and they had become lost amongst the thick fog after more than an hour of rowing. After thinking that they had perhaps spotted a light from the island's lighthouse, they tried to head back towards it in search of dry land. But tragically, this was not meant to be for Michael. The waters became choppy, and he ended up falling overboard in the treacherous conditions. He was presumed to have lost his life as he was never seen again. Or was he? Could it have been his spirit longing to be found that showed up at that Christmas Eve party decades later? It's impossible to know, of course, but this explanation would certainly match up with the clothing the ghost appeared to be wearing. There are so many paranormal tales from Alcatraz that I could explore, and not just from its operational days either. Visitors in more recent times have reported seeing spirits roaming about the empty building, and it's still a hugely popular destination for ghost hunters. In 2014, a Birmingham woman named Sheila Sillery Walsh and her partner Paul went to the former prison whilst visiting from the UK. They have spoken about feeling very creeped out from the moment they arrived, and during their tour, Sheila took several photos of the rooms they saw. When she looked back at one snap taken through the window of the visitation block on her phone, she was stunned to see the image of a woman in the picture. I've seen it myself, and I have to say that it is incredibly odd. From her hair and general style, it looks like she could be from the 1940s. And even the previously skeptical Paul found it hard to explain the photo away. There had been no one in the room that Sheila photographed, and it was definitely not her reflection either. I'll put the photo up on our Instagram page so you can have a look for yourselves. It is so weird. The more you look into the different Alcatraz ghost stories, the more the Christmas Eve tale sounds legitimate. It seems to be a place where spirits have no trouble making their presence known. It's just one more reason why I'm determined to visit on a tour myself someday. After learning about this, maybe I'll even try to make it a Christmas time trip. Well, there we have it, 4 festive ghost stories for you, and my part in helping to bring back that tradition of telling spooky tales at Christmas. I hope you found these as interesting as I did whilst researching them. I would love to know if you have any thoughts or theories on any of them, and which ones really sent a shiver down your spine. The Mistletoe Bride story really gets me. I know it's more vague and harder to verify than some of the others, but it's just so chillingly tragic. It's so sad. As always, I look forward to hearing your views, but before we get to our usual outro bits and bobs, here's Weird Media. This week, I wanted to recommend a podcast that has just captivated me. It was so well done, and there has just been a special bonus episode released, which is very significant indeed. So if you live in the UK and love to watch a bit of BBC breakfast in the mornings like me, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the presenter John Kay. He's my absolute favourite TV journalist. I think he's both passionate and compassionate about the stories he covers, and as someone with a journalism background myself, I just really admire the way that he works. So when I came across a podcast he created for the BBC which centred around an unsolved true crime case, I knew I had to tune in. And what an emotional roller coaster it was. The podcast is called Fairy Meadow, and it's all about the disappearance of 3-year-old Cheryl Grimmer from an Australian beach back in 1970. Much of the 8-episode series is focused on not only the story of what may have happened to Cheryl on that terrible day over 50 years ago, but also on her brother Ricky, who is still searching for answers 5 decades later. John, of course, covers the case and the information that we know about Cheryl's disappearance, much of which is explored through discussions with Ricky and other people involved in the investigation. But there's also a real emphasis on the future too, and the ways in which this mystery could potentially finally be solved. I'm not going to give everything away right now, as it really is worth listening and following the story through the podcast episodes. But there was an update posted back in November that could be a real turning point. The previous episodes came out in early 2022, so getting this bonus episode, which was entitled A New Lead, was a really hopeful moment, and I am completely invested in seeing where this could possibly go. It's not an easy listen in terms of the subject matter. It really is upsetting at times, and there were parts which were absolutely heartbreaking. But it is a brilliantly well-told story. John's dedication is clear. I mean, he's literally out there in Australia at times, knocking on doors and trying to get answers. You can really tell how connected he feels to the case. Fairy Meadow looks to be available on all the major podcast players, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we'll have further episodes with some important new information coming up in the near future too. Right, a few quick nods to the sources which helped me put together my research for this episode. There was a fab ranker article by Kelly Crease from December 2022, which gave me my starting point for a few of these tales. A piece on Suffolk Live by Daniel DeFalco from December 2021 about the Mistletoe Bride, as well as an article on ghostcitytours.com about the same story. There was that WLBT piece about the haunted doll carriage. That was by Josh Carter from January 2021 and was very helpful indeed. For the Roos Hall story, there was a piece from the East Anglian Daily Times from December 2020 by Stacia Briggs and Shifra Connor, as well as a BBC article about it from back in October 2008. Finally, we had two fab pieces relating to the Alcatraz stories, one from usghostadventures.com and the other from the Huffington Post from June 2014. If you would like to get in touch and share your thoughts on these stories, there are loads of ways to do so. I mentioned our Instagram page. You can find us there at Things Get Weird Podcast. And on Facebook, there's both the private discussion group and the main podcast page too. Just pop Things Are About to Get Weird into the search bar and they should both show up for you. Our Twitter or X can be found at About to Get Weird, and our email address is thingsgetweirdpodcast@gmail.com. Finally, as always, our Patreon and merch pages are linked in the show notes. I am so grateful to all of you for listening and for all of your ratings and reviews too. They make a huge difference, so if you've enjoyed the show and would like to leave one wherever you listen, it would be massively appreciated as always. Thank you all so much for being here. Merry Christmas to all who celebrate. I hope you have a lovely festive season. I'm going to do my very best to still bring you a Weird Fix episode next Wednesday, even though it will be in that weird in-between time between Christmas and New Year. Betwixtmas, I believe it's called. From memory, I think I talked about it in last year's Christmas special. It's a great word. I love it. Anyway, until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep it weird, but the good kind of weird.